Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But we promised you some America. We're going to give you some America. There's just 48 hours to go until the US knows its fate. You will all be familiar with this bar, but if you don't, this is the magic number, the 270 Electoral College votes that one of them needs to win. Everyone agrees that Hillary Clinton has the more plausible route to get over this line, but Trump could still pull it off. Now, he is calling himself, again and again, Mr. Brexit. Oh, my God, where's that tweet? It's right down here. This is the real Donald Trump. They will soon be calling me Mr. Brexit. Why? Because he thinks he's going to pull off a Brexit-style upset. So is he? Now, there's loads and loads of parallels, but we're picking out three for you. So the first one is polling, very famously. So, oh, no, I've put up the wrong... Oh, no, I have put up the right one. Sorry, there's too many things on the board right now. So, OK, indeed, yeah. Too early. Right, OK, so he thinks on polling was misleading about Brexit, and Trump says it will be out in America too. So you can see here, Clinton's in blue, Trump in red, and the polls have narrowed in recent days. But most would expect Hillary to win. If US polling is wrong, it is wrong by way more than it was out ahead of Brexit. Now, the other way is non-voters. Now, in our referendum, 6% of Brits came out to vote who hadn't bothered to vote for years. Trump thinks that there are also hidden Trumpsters out there too, energised by someone anti-politics as usual, except Brexiteers had an aggressive get-out-the-vote campaign. Trump doesn't look like he has much of a ground campaign, but our experts over there will talk about that in a second. And then the third one is that a lot of Americans feel, as some Brexiteer voters did, that they've done badly from globalisation and they want change. Now, many Trumpsters live in states that are declining industrial states in the so-called American Rust Belt. Now, he'll probably win states like Ohio and Iowa because of that. But the question is, are there enough of these voters across the states to get him over the line? So, yes, parallels, but we'll know for sure in 3 days' time. Robert.
Pippa, you advised President George W. Bush some years ago. I don't think you're a Trump supporter, but you just said on our programme that you think Trump is going to win. Is it because, in your view, there are just loads of shy Trumpsters, people who, in their hearts, know that they're going to vote for him, but just don't dare say that publicly, or semi-publicly?
I think there are a number of things. The Trump team thinks that the shy voters, the pro-Trump shy voters, are maybe a 2 to 3% of the undeclared.
Okay.
I think the number is a lot higher than that. And one of the things you see is whenever Trump goes anywhere, he gets tens of thousands of people coming out. Clinton shows up and she can't really get a crowd unless she has rock stars there. Yeah. And it tells you something about the underlying sentiment. Also, the key thing is in the background, this declaration by the FBI that they're reopening the investigation into the emails has begun to sway some of the voters. It's de-energized the Democrats and re-energized the Republicans.
Tina, if Hillary Clinton wins, there are many people who believe that she'll be the first president in history who knows that they're going to face impeachment proceedings. Will she be a lame duck?
I think that under either scenario, both presidents will be facing real political paralysis in Congress, which is why I've been saying consistently that political risks, the potential for political disruption is high, no matter who wins. So yes, I mean, we've also flagged she'll probably be continuously investigated. The WikiLeaks trove probably contains enough to keep her busy, so that raises questions about presidential immunity. But both presidents are going to have a divided Congress, almost certainly.
And in the US election, Donald Trump was rushed off the stage in the middle of a speech after someone in the crowd shouted "gun," causing his security team to move in. There are reports a white, middle-aged man was taken away from the event in Reno in Nevada in handcuffs. The US Secret Service, though, has said no weapon was found, and after a delay of around 10 minutes, Mr. Trump resumed his speech.
Well, welcome back to Washington. So just who are the candidates in the presidential election? Both have lived much of their lives in the public eye, but yet mysteries swirl around them. In just a moment, we'll hear from the author of Trump Nation, a biography naturally of Donald Trump. But first, I'm joined by the journalist and author Suzanne Goldberg, author of Madam President, to find out more about candidate Hillary Clinton. Very good to see you, Suzanne. Madam President, is that you making the title? Is that you making an assumption?
Well, there was a question mark at the end of the titles, which I think
get
is
that inflection in my voice.
Yeah, so I think that is the question. Is America ready to elect a woman to be president? I originally wrote that book in 2008, but 8 years later, it's just as much a big question.
So, yeah, I mean, you've looked into the background, and this is both, I suppose, the advantage and the impediment for Hillary Clinton, isn't it? The length of time she's witnessed and been in public service, right back to Arkansas, Bill Clinton as governor, then president, then she's a senator, then Secretary of State. Well, clearly she's prepared, but people just go, as Donald Trump says, you're an insider.
That is true, and she is really caught in this predicament, and it's a predicament that's about gender. On the one hand, you know, she has to show that she has the experience to be president, to overcome this idea that women are too soft-hearted, too flighty, that somehow can't deal with the rigors of office. But on the other hand, that long resume comes with baggage, and baggage from the scandals of the Clinton White House when her husband Bill Clinton was president, and from what has been her own record as Secretary of State.
Just talk about how tricky that was for her during the Bill Clinton years in the White House and those scandals, the kind of standing by your man approach that she took.
Absolutely. At that time, you know, Hillary Clinton sort of saved her husband's presidency by standing by her man. But the way she did it actually hurt her own image, because she actually quoted Tammy Wynette and she said, "I'm not standing by my man like some old country western song. I'm doing it because I honor what he's done." And so she annoyed a lot of people. She hit a nerve with a lot of people. And that, in some ways, is the beginning of, you know, this whole idea of Hillary Clinton as a polarizing figure. For some women, she's inspirational. For other women and men, she's too much to take.
But then you looked into that first term, 92 to 96, when she did want to get involved. I mean, use her considerable intellect, get involved as First Lady and be more than just the decorative First Lady. And she got slapped back for that. She got a huge amount of criticism.
She did, and I would argue that there was a lot going on there. For one, there were these perceptions about what a First Lady should do. Should it be an entirely ceremonial role? Should it be, you know, she wanted to drive directly into policy. She wanted to be White House Chief of Staff at first. Then she settled for having this big lift of the healthcare policy. There was a backlash against that, but I think you also have to acknowledge that the way Hillary Clinton conducted that exercise was flawed from the beginning. She made a lot of mistakes.
And why do you think, I mean, right, fast forward up to now, why do you think she hasn't been able to get any of that magic that, in a different way, of course, that President Obama, then candidate Obama, was able to do in 2008. I remember being in Boston, where he's from, and people who weren't Democrats saying, we want to vote for this guy. Imagine the United States has its first African-American president. Well, now it's on the cusp. It could have its first female president, but there's none of that buzz going around.
There's none of that buzz. And you have to acknowledge also that Barack Obama is an incredibly gifted politician and public speaker. And when he comes to the stage, time after time, it's just magical many times. Hillary Clinton is much more prosaic campaigner. So there's that as well. And there is that long record that we've just talked about, and there is inbuilt resistance to the idea of women rising to that highest office.
But I mean, amongst women in particular, does any of that idea that she may be about to break through the glass ceiling, does that resonate? Is that connecting?
That's huge. That's huge. If you look at the numbers, you know, she has in some parts of the population a 20-point lead about Donald Trump. And he, in a way, has played into that because of who he is. And he's, you know, it's very stark now what the choice is in terms of women and, you know, the role of women in society. You know, you've got Donald Trump, who's sort of made constant derogatory remarks about women and has sort of joked about sexual assault of women. You've got some of his surrogates now on the campaign trail making dismissive comments about women. And then you have Hillary Clinton, who stands for women's advancement. And I have seen through the polling numbers a lot of women responding to that message. they're really fed up with what the kind of remarks that Trump has been making.
And what's your take, Suzanne, on the whole email scandal? I mean, what's your belief on what went wrong? Is it just that she didn't get it, she didn't understand it? Clearly not a spy or anything like that,
No,
but just feeling entitled.
This is
I don't have to do this.
This is Hillary Clinton's bad side, which is Hillary Clinton is a paranoid control freak. She really thought that she did not have to allow the public to look at her email. That was the only reason to put the server in the basement. She did not want freedom of information requests from journalists. She did not want biographers to be looking at all of that email. It's not that she used the State Department email for government business and the private for private. She wanted all of her email off the books.
Well, great talking to you, Suzanne. Thank you very much indeed for giving us a bit of insight into Hillary Clinton. Suzanne Goldberg there.
Thank you.
Well, now we'll turn our attention to the other candidate. Who is Donald Trump, and is he really the hugely successful businessman he claims to be? Well, one man, Tim O'Brien, made it his mission to try to find out when he wrote the biography Trump Nation. And I spoke to him yesterday evening and started by asking him about the allegation made in his book that Donald Trump's wealth is actually, or was actually then, only about 5% of what Mr. Trump was claiming.
And that actually came out in court too. You know, we litigated, he sued me for the book. And during the course of a deposition in that case, we produced audits from his own bankers that estimated that his wealth was less than a tenth of what he said it was at the time. He's spent many, many years inflating many aspects of his life, whether it's his business record, his wealth, his policy acuity. That's just part and parcel of the world of Donald Trump.
So just on the numbers there, so we're talking about your best guess, and you had quite a lot of access, didn't you, to some of the key figures around him, was that he was worth about a $250 million. Still a lot of money, but $250 million. And he was going around saying that he's worth about $6 billion.
That's correct at the time. More recently, recall that when he announced his run for the presidency, he said he was worth about $8.7 billion. And then less than a month later, that number had magically grown to $10 billion. So presto, within about a month, he added $1.3 billion to his net worth. My colleagues at Bloomberg Business Week have estimated that his wealth now may be around $2.7 billion. But the issue is he never puts out what he owes, what his debts are. He puts out inflated estimates of what his assets are worth, but he keeps all of his debts behind the scenes. And you can't really know what anyone's worth unless they're completely transparent about their debts as well.
I'm getting closer to an overall question about his character, but not yet, because I want to throw into the mix before we get there the access you had and the relationship you built up with Donald Trump while you were writing the book, while you were researching it.
We spent quite a bit of time together. I flew with him on his jet to Los Angeles, cross country, back and forth. We flew down to his estate in Mar-a-Lago. I had dinner with Melania and Donald in Mar-a-Lago. I was in his apartment, in his offices. He called me several times a week for a long period of time just to check in. I don't actually think I'm unusual in that regard. He loves the press. But I did get unusual access for the book, and I spent quite a bit of time with him on the book. And you know, there's many faces of Donald Trump. The Donald Trump that you see in person is a different character from the Donald Trump you see on a stage, or a Donald Trump who's campaigning for president.
But then the attempt to strong-arm you and ended up in court as you described. You wouldn't be the first.
No, I wouldn't be the first. I mean, he's used, you know, the threats of lawsuits repeatedly, I think, to quiet the media, to go after his business competitors, more recently to silence women who've come out and alleged that he's sexually abused them. He's used the courts in a fairly frivolous and haphazard way to try to intimidate people.
But some would say it's just unpredictability, and that's perhaps sometimes not a bad quality in a president if you're dealing on the international stage with people like President Putin and Xi Jinping.
Well, you know, I actually think unpredictability is a very bad quality in a president. You know, you've got someone in Donald Trump who said that he's willing to rearm South Korea with nuclear weapons, Japan with nuclear weapons. He's played fast and loose with our relationship with NATO. I don't think voters want someone who has their finger on the nuclear button to be unpredictable. I think they want someone who's mature, self-possessed, strategically disciplined, and emotionally disciplined. And I wouldn't say any of those attributes apply to Donald Trump.
Just last question, Tim, just to explain to viewers in the UK how, I mean, okay, we've found out perhaps that his wealth isn't as much as he claims. He's still worth an awful lot of money, whatever it is. How does he connect? How has he connected so effectively, particularly with those blue-collar workers, many of whom are so angry because they haven't got anything, and he's got the gold-plated jets and the rest of it?
Well, that's a great question. I think that gets to the core of his presidency. I think he's connecting to the voters that he's connecting to are the same people that were fans of The Apprentice. He has represented for a long time this ideal of someone who's an entrepreneurial success and a business success. Now we know that a lot of that is artifice, and there's a lot of Oz behind the curtain in the world of Donald Trump. The reality is he hasn't been a very successful businessman. He's been a very successful self-promoter. But I think when he came into this campaign, he located very early on a lot of understandable anger among white working class males who've been dislocated by deindustrialization, who are still living through a lot of the impact of the 2008 financial crisis, where they don't feel that their jobs are secure, their mortgages aren't secure, their children's futures aren't secure, and they feel ignored. They feel ignored by establishment media, establishment business, and establishment politicians. And Trump really tapped into that anger. And I think had he been a different person, had he been a more capable person, he could have used the advantages that he had gained from appealing to that group of voters by actually building a political movement around it. But because he's so wildly ignorant of public policy and so self-absorbed that he's unable to build teams, he hasn't built the kind of campaign around that movement that a more capable politician might have.
Tim O'Brien, good to get your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So with just 2 days to go, the candidates are travelling thousands of miles across the country, prioritising the states which they think could go either way. Now, one of the most important of the so-called swing states is Ohio, which is seen as a key indicator for the way the country as a whole will vote. Well, I'm joined now from there by Jeremy Fugleberg, who's covering the election race for the Cincinnati Enquirer. Very good morning to you, Jeremy. Just explain for our audience why Ohio is so important in U.S. presidential election history.
Ohio generally serves as a bellwether for the country. How Ohio goes, so goes the nation. Republicans don't win elections if they don't win Ohio, and traditionally, Ohio has represented the rest of the country in its demographics and its type of industry. So it's been a powerful indicator and also a provider of, well, many votes. So it's been a very important state for decades.
Yeah, and what are the indications now? I'm reading my morning papers and seeing it's tending towards Mr. Trump.
It is. Recent polls indicate that it's a very close race, a tie, or he's up by a few points. We had one out, I believe, this morning that shows Clinton up by a point. So this is a razor-thin margin for either candidate here. So you're seeing a lot of activity from both campaigns going into these final days. However, Ohio is actually not getting quite as much love as it's used to getting. Usually, in the last few days of an election, the candidates are here every day, or their surrogates are pounding through the state, and you're certainly seeing some of that attention. For example, Clinton was with Jay-Z Friday night and Beyonce, and Trump flew in Friday as well. So you're seeing some of that attention, but not quite as much as usual. There are many other states in play here, and Ohio may actually end up not being as important as it usually has been.
Whoa, because everyone talks about paths to victory, don't they? And as you mentioned there, Republicans need Ohio, but Mr. Trump needs Ohio and some others as well.
Very much so. So Ohio is a crucial linchpin for Trump for a victory. He needs Ohio as a strong base of support. Clinton doesn't need Ohio. However, if she wins Ohio, that is a spike in Donald Trump's chances of success here. So you're seeing a lot of activity for her almost as a spoiler. But it's entirely possible that for the first time in many, many years, the way the country votes may actually be opposite of the direction Ohio goes. The rest of the country has changed demographically in ways that Ohio simply has not.
Well, I mean, that would be extraordinary, but it has been an extraordinary campaign, as we've been discussing. Just tell us about the demographics, then, that remain relatively unchanged within Ohio.
So Ohio, unlike the rest of the country, to be honest, we're just whiter. We're whiter, very strong working class numbers here, less educated voters when it comes to, and I mean, if you're talking about someone here that is more representative of Ohio than elsewhere, you have a white working class male with, say, not a college education. That's a stronger component here than it is in some states. And that's held true here even as other states have evolved, especially with the Latino vote, which could be a very powerful factor in this election.
Do you think it helped that the Republicans held their convention to endorse Donald Trump in Cleveland, in Ohio?
I think that always helps to you dominate the local media markets for quite some time, more than just the week the convention is here, but also the campaign itself. I mean, Trump and Pence and his surrogates have worked this state, and they've gone all throughout the state, including in rural and suburban areas that are hotbeds for Trump support in Ohio. So they have been here frequently and made quite an impression.
And Jeremy, do you think in a way, I mean, overall, and extrapolating out from Ohio, the election could come down to turnout? Donald Trump, as has been much discussed, seems to have narrowed the people he's appealing to. Plenty of them, or maybe enough of them, as you described there in Ohio. But are there enough of those type of people elsewhere in the United States?
This is the key question, and honestly, it's true in Ohio as well. A lot of this is coming down to turnout. The Republicans have said that they certainly have invested money in encouraging Republican voters who typically vote on Election Day to vote early. Democrats always, their strong base of support is in early voting, getting people to come out in the weeks in advance to Election Day. You're starting to see that in Ohio, but it's been slower. Some of the urban areas here that are the core supporters for Hillary Clinton, we've seen some slow turnout, but that's varied as well. So it's very hard to say going into these final days. A key component here, and this is true elsewhere, is the Hillary Clinton campaign was campaigning and out in force with their ground game very early in this campaign compared to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's ground game, his campaign field operations came in much more slowly. They were underfunded. They were working with Republicans where there was a lot of division still. So it remains to be seen whether that chaotic, disorganized campaign effort that has coalesced to some degree, it remains to be seen whether that's going to be strong enough to counteract the get out the vote power of the Clinton machine.
Oh, OK. Well, great talking to you. Thanks for your take there. Jeremy Fugleberg there from the Cincinnati Enquirer. So for voters in America's old industrial heartlands, a huge issue is the economy and the decline of traditional manufacturing. In the swing state of Pennsylvania, for example, thousands of jobs were lost when Bethlehem's steel factory shut down, and it's taken decades for the state to recover from that and other closures. Well, as part of a special report, Ed Conway visited the factory to talk to people there about the US economy and the upcoming election. Well, we hope to bring you that report in a moment or two. I'll just tell you, you can watch it right now on our catch-up service and on Sky Atlantic. Sorry, we don't have it for you right now. But some of the concerns that are raised by Ed Conway, our economics editor, concerning the economy, I put some of them to Adam Posen. He is an influential economist who leads the Peterson Institute here in Washington, D.C., and used to set interest rates as part of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. Well, I started by asking Mr. Posen whether globalization was perhaps the underlying driving economic force behind this presidential election.
I don't think that's quite fair to globalization or to the American voter, frankly. You're right to focus on the economy. There are a lot of people quite unhappy, and they're unhappy because of relative shares, how they feel they personally are doing, their community is doing. So it's kind of analogous to some things we saw in the UK with Brexit, where Wales, was feeling one way and London was feeling another. You see a lot of that, a rural-urban divide, a regional divide. But unfortunately in the U.S. you can never get away from race. I mean, this election is at least as much about race and perceptions of race and the relative standing of poorer whites vis-a-vis blacks and Hispanics as much as globalization.
Well, I suppose, yeah, because of course in terms of people who are left behind, many African Americans have been left behind as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's a terrible thing to think about this way, but it really has become much more of an identity politics election than we've had in a very long time.
But with the discussion you've heard from both candidates about, in particular, trade and globalization and China and various trade deals, do you fear whoever's elected for the direction of the American economy?
I do. I do, because trade is not only just sort of how open or closed you are, although that's huge. And it's not even about the markets, it's about productivity. Just as in the UK, we've seen a huge slowdown in productivity growth in the US since the crisis, in fact, starting before the crisis. And you can't make growth go, you can't pay your bills, you can't raise wages if you don't have productivity growth. And we've done studies, as have others, that when you're not trading, you're reducing competition in your economy, you're less productive. So there's a very real tight tie there. But the two candidates are not the same. They're both bad, but different degrees of bad on trade. So as we put it in one of our publications, Hillary Clinton's refusal to do TPP, reluctance to expand trade is a fender bender.
This is the Pacific Trade.
Yeah, the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, or the treatment of Mexico. It's a fender bender. It's just a small bump in cars. Donald Trump is a head-on collision. It's potentially fatal. It's just a horrible set of policies. And what's been scary is we've been debating some of Trump's advisors, and they really believe this stuff. It's not for show.
So do you really expect that President Trump and his team would put up some really big tariff barriers, and therefore effectively free trade, global free trade is over?
I don't know if it's over, but it is a real danger. They keep saying, well, maybe it's just a negotiating position, but if you're the Chinese, if you're the Mexicans, the Canadians, the Japanese, all the people involved here, but particularly the Chinese and the Mexicans, they're not going to fold just because Trump says something. He will actually have to make good on some of his threat. And that's when things get really ugly. Ugly for Americans as well as for Chinese and Mexicans.
And if it's President Clinton and she has to say to the American public, look, free trade is not actually the source of your ills, it's the source of your prosperity, doesn't she have to prove it then through a more redistributive set of policies? She has to sort things out, the people that have gained from globalization and help the people who've lost.
I think you've put it exactly right. And the failure of the U.S. has been to look after our workers and do even just basic redistribution and looking after people who get displaced, whether they're displaced from foreign trade or they're displaced because a plant moves from Michigan to South Carolina, or because the film industry in New York dies because you have digital cameras. We don't look after anybody. I mean, even countries like the UK and Australia, which have very free market labor compared to the rest of the world, they do a better job of looking after their workers than the US does. And Clinton's got to take that on.
But Dr. Peston, how then, I mean, given your analysis, how did the language of effectively China's the fault here? The jobs have been outsourced, when in actual fact, as we know from the United States, a lot of it's technology.
Absolutely. Again, I'm not just trying to agree with you, but you have it exactly right. So think of manufacturing. So Mr. Trump, and to a lesser degree Mrs. Clinton, have made a big thing about the glory days, back in Pittsburgh when they made steel and manufacturing. Well, the fact is the U.S. now makes far greater value added in manufacturing than we did 10, 20 years ago. Our share of global trade in manufacturing has gone up in some ways. But employment's gone way down. So it's not because of sales, it's because of technology. And this is true if you look at Germany or Japan. They've got fewer people working in manufacturing than they did, producing more stuff. That's the way the world works. And so then you look at Pittsburgh, where Trump crazily had a speech about this, and Pittsburgh's now a center of medical technology, of media, of education. Pittsburgh has moved on, even if Trump hasn't.
Have you ever seen an election like this? I mean, it always used to be a rule of thumb, didn't it, that if unemployment levels went above 8 or 9%, then the incumbent or the incumbent's party lost. Well, employment levels are still fairly high. It's just the kind of job then now, is it?
Well, it's partly the kind of job, but again, it's a sense of who is adjusting. Because as you pointed out, I mean, it partly is trade. I don't want to say trade has no effect. There are certain kinds of jobs that go away. But trade, technology, competition, they're all part of the same thing. And the people who are forced to adjust now are increasingly less educated white people. And it used to be that in the US, if you had a recession, if you had an adjustment, it was black people, it was women, single women who had to do the adjusting, and middle-aged white males rarely were out of work. Maybe they got laid off temporarily. That has changed. They're now as exposed as everybody else, maybe even more exposed. And so you're right that it's unusual that the general health of the US economy isn't being felt by these people. I think it's a relative status thing.
What does it mean for the UK? I'm thinking, you know, whoever's president, and even if they're a one-term president, at some point in that 4-year term, certainly an 8-year term, the UK comes knocking on the door post-Brexit, having left the European Union, saying now we're free to start negotiations. Clearly we want to do one with the largest economy in the world. Does President Trump or President Clinton say, no, we don't do those kind of things anymore?
You know, Mr. Trump is willing to live with a lot of contradictions. So at the same time that he's saying he doesn't want to do any trade and trade's a bad deal and all this, he suddenly leapt out at his Scottish golf course and said, oh, I'd love to have the UK at the head of the queue. Mrs. Clinton, it's a little different. I mean, to be honest, there's no legal reason why the UK couldn't join the TPP. The TPP says the word trans-Pacific in it, but the rules are applicable to anybody. And so if the UK wanted to, and some of the moderate Republicans like Robert Zellick have put forward this idea.
And just on things that perhaps the president doesn't have too much influence on, but have a huge global influence, the dollar and interest rates. What do you see post-election, those directions?
Well, I mean, the Fed is on a very slow tightening path, and the election will have nothing to do with that initially. If Mrs. Clinton were to deliver the kinds of proposals she's talking about, or if she gets through no budget because the House of Representatives remains Republican-controlled, which are the two likely outcomes, then basically the Fed's on the same path. The dollar continues to strengthen a little bit, particularly against the pound, and interest rates go up 25 basis points at a time every few months. If Mr. Trump gets in and does the plans he's talking about, and presumably if Mr. Trump gets in, there would be a large swing in the Congress towards Republicans as well, because the only way he gets in is if there's huge turnout. Then he's blowing out the budget, and then you would expect the Fed to tighten much more aggressively.
Dr. Peston, great getting your thoughts. Thank you very much indeed for sparing the time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's now bring you that special report I promised you from our economics editor, Ed Conway. Ed visited a factory, a former steelworks in Pennsylvania, to talk to people there about the US economy and the upcoming election.
Safety beam guardrail is cold formed from strip steel.
Try to put yourself in the position of the people who live here in the Rust Belt, who worked for industrial giants like Bethlehem Steel, who helped build the skyscrapers and railroads. While the rest of America powered on, this place feels like it was left behind.
After 140 years of continuous hot metal production, the furnaces are cold and silent this Christmas. The passing of an era that has left Bethlehem with little to celebrate in this season of goodwill.
Given that many of the jobs here fell victim effectively to cheap imports from overseas, perhaps there's no surprise that both of the candidates have disavowed free trade, whether that's TPP, TTIP, even existing deals like NAFTA. Why stay open when effectively that means places like this get closed?
Bethlehem Steel was about employees. If you worked at the bottom of Bethlehem Steel and you stayed long enough, you worked your way up the ladder, you had wonderful benefits, you had perks, you had a lot of things that in today's world are not seen in corporate America.
The Free Trade Act was kind of like thrown at us, forced on us, and I don't know if it was the right thing to do.
If you're a blue-collar guy, you better be a serious worker here to survive.
To bring jobs back to our country, it should be a priority. We have young children graduating college and having no job market.
China's taken us over, really. It's like nothing's American-made anymore. If you look at the clothing, nothing's American-made.
America needs to support America, and then it would maybe get somewhere.
Ed Conway there on the former Bethlehem steel plant in Pennsylvania. And you're watching Murnaghan on Sky News. Welcome back. You're watching Murnaghan live from Washington, and Donald Trump's campaign slogan is, of course, "Make America Great Again." It's emblazoned across his supporters' baseball caps and T-shirts and a lot of other places too. But when do those Republicans actually think America was last great? Well, we put the question to people in Tampa in Florida.
When Ronald Reagan was president.
When Reagan was president. Reagan, that's it.
Probably when Ronald Reagan was president.
Probably back in Reagan's time.
Probably President Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
Or, before we had all of this dictatorship we have now.
It was great at several instances, particularly during the Civil War.
Oh. I don't think I was alive at that point.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. You got me on the spot here, don't you?
Before 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was signed into commission.
See, it was a lot greater before Obama got there. And we're not going to have any more of that.
Wow, that's a good question.
Before Obama. Yeah, before Obama. Yeah.
Well, before Obama, you heard it there. Well, it seems that the anti-establishment wave flooding America partly stems from a sense of dissatisfaction with the incumbent, the current President Obama. So what should we see as President Obama's legacy? I'm joined now by Gary Dechter, who was senior advisor to the White House Economic Council and National Security Council under Barack Obama. He's now senior director at the Washington think tank ACPO. Very good to see you, Gary. Well, redress the balance a bit. I mean, they were obviously Trump supporters there, referring to the Obama dictatorship and saying that America was great before Obama. What have been, for you, his greatest achievements?
Well, I think President Obama is going to go down as a president of great consequence. He led the country out of the worst recession since the Great Recession. We've got consecutive job growth since January 2010. More than 15 million jobs have been created. Unemployment has been halved. It's down at about 5%. So we're at full employment. We had massive legislative accomplishment in the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Many presidents had failed to do that, and now we have 20 more million Americans with health insurance. It's against the law to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. These are tremendous accomplishments. And I think there's been a lot of good international engagement, brand new relationships with countries that were hostile to the United States, Cuba, Iran, great leadership, great poise, and a scandal-free presidency for 8 years, which is remarkable.
Okay, quite a list. I mean, you mentioned there, and it seems a long time ago there now, 8 years ago when he came into power, when he won that election so dramatically. Do you feel in a way, though, he would have been, I mean, in your book, an even greater president if he had not been placed in those horrendous times, the worst recession since the Great Depression? He had so much to deal with. The economy was in a parlous, a terrible condition.
Well, I think the test of leadership is how you perform under great challenge, and he will be remembered for leading the country out of very difficult and dark times, and I think it enabled him to rise to his greatest potential. And I think we needed exactly that sort of president at the time, and we got one. It was a prejudice-shattering election. We are on the verge now of another historic moment. And I hope the country is ready for it.
Has he been, though, then a lame duck? And before, in his second term, and before he became a lame duck, he's been hamstrung by what's been going on in that place just over our shoulder there. The gridlock in Washington, the opposition by opponents, by Republican opponents in the House.
Well, the president has had to contend with a Republican-controlled Congress for the vast majority of his term, and he's learned to use the power of the executive branch, executive authority, the power of the bully pulpit, the convening power, the ability to draw Americans and businesses together in partnership with him. He's used regulatory authority to great effect. And, I think that's what you see now is a much stronger presidency, and the next president will surely also contend with a divided Congress, and will have to also exercise that kind of authority.
But let me just touch on something you mentioned in your first answer about his foreign policy achievements. Yes, that new engagement, we get that with places previously untouched or shunned by American administrations. But, the key issues there, the withdrawals from Afghanistan, from Iraq, some saying perhaps that was too early given what's going on in those countries now. The Libyan situation, and in particular what's been allowed to develop in Syria right now?
Well, I think
the lack of intervention in Syria.
The humanitarian crisis in Syria is a great problem, and I think it's a problem that the next president will have to contend with as the rest of the world. The removal of U.S. combat troops from Iraq and Afghanistan has been an important accomplishment.
But I mean, was it in Iraq? I mean, they've been sucked back in, okay, as military advisors, as trainers, but the sense now, well, if only they'd stayed perhaps a few more years. Islamic State, which completely blindsided the Obama administration, Islamic State could not have come into formation and taken so much territory.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to second guess, or it's easy to second guess, rather, what would have happened. But I think a protracted war with American troops on the ground is not what the American people wanted. It wasn't in the judgment of the president and his advisors the right course, and he made a commitment to withdraw, and he committed that, and he accomplished that, which I think is important.
What do you think his frustrations will be personally?
Well, I think he campaigned on bringing the country together, and today we stand a bitterly divided country. We're either going to elect the first woman president of the United States, or we're going to elect a reality television star who has undermined, questioned the integrity of American democracy, boasted about the ability to sexually assault women with impunity, threatened to jail his opponent if he were elected. It should be an easy choice, and it's obviously one where the country is divided, and it's very close.
And just talk about that rebuilding of the relationship with Hillary Clinton. A bitter campaign between them for the 2008 nomination, but then he appointed a Secretary of State, and now he's campaigning almost as if he was running again.
Well, I think it's a testament to her qualifications and her seriousness as a policy person and as a statesman. And it shows that the decisions that these people make are decisions based on what they think is going to be best for the country. And these are responsible, serious people, and I think their alliance is a reflection of that.
But that appointment of Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, given the bad blood that went before, that was a grown-up, that was a presidential decision.
Absolutely. And I think you'd expect to see Hillary Clinton, if she were elected, to also reach out and include in her cabinet, include among senior positions advisors, hopefully some Republicans, in a way to bridge the country and to show that we may appear to be divided along partisan lines, but there are good people on both sides who can work together.
Gary Decter, great talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your insight as the sun comes up here on another fine day, it looks like, in Washington, D.C.
Now, let's turn to the other big story of the week, and one that's only going to get bigger. That's the US presidential election, where Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton and Republican candidate Donald Trump are still slugging it out ahead of voting on Tuesday. You'll be able to follow the results here on BBC One from 11:15. And it wouldn't be an election without Jeremy Vine and his box of tricks. Here he is with all you need to know before the big night.
For Donald Trump to win, he has to unwind a lot of the victories that Barack Obama saw in 2008 and in 2012. Now, let's have a look at the result of the 2012 presidential election. Here it is on the floor of the studio. And first glance, it looks, doesn't it, like Mitt Romney for the Republicans won because there's more red. That's not how the system works. There's a system of so-called electoral college votes. You need to pass through 270. You do that by coming first in states where there are the most people. And that's what Barack Obama did. In fact, this is a result where the Democrats won by quite a margin. The map will be blank when we go into election night on Tuesday, but we'll be looking at certain key states, the ones with the electoral college votes which are in play. So, for example, in the Southwest, Arizona, where I'm standing, and Nevada and Colorado. And then head with me to the top right of the map, the area around Lake Michigan and to the west of it, Ohio and Pennsylvania here, and Iowa. All vital states waiting to see if they turn red. Look how many Obama won last time. Trump surely needs to cover half of the board behind me with red. He needs to take states like Virginia and North Carolina. Interesting sounding bells which will come in early in the evening. And then there's crucial Florida, which under the system has a lot of clout in the so-called electoral college, with 29 electoral college votes. And of course, it was pivotal, Florida, wasn't it, to George Bush Jr.'s victory in 2000 against Al Gore. So for now, We wait to see what will happen on this map. We can zone in on those crucial battleground states and get, we hope, an early indication of the result. Joe.
Thanks, Jeremy. We can't wait. Well, many of us here in Britain don't know much about what a Clinton or Trump victory might mean for America and the rest of the world. In fact, you might not know much about either of them beyond their well-documented respective scandals. So let's talk now to one man who's backing Mrs. Clinton. He's the Conservative MP Simon Burns, and he's in Washington. Simon Burns, yes, we've heard an awful lot about the email saga regarding Mrs. Clinton, but what does she actually stand for?
She stands for decisiveness in policy. She wants to protect the Affordable Health Care Act and improve it, but most importantly on economic policy, which is of most interest to most American voters. She wants to cut taxes on the middle classes, raise taxes on those earning at the top levels, and invest in infrastructure throughout the United States.
Right. I mean, one could be forgiven for thinking they hadn't heard anything about the sort of manifesto promises because there's been so much heat everywhere else. Are those things actually cutting through to the electorate?
Yes, but as you rightly say, the election campaign has been fought more on people being rude about each other and the kind of the personal issues. But underneath, particularly during the primary elections, certainly Secretary Clinton got across her range of policies across the board as to what a Clinton administration would look like.
Right. I mean, Donald Trump has said that if he's president, Britain won't be at the back of the queue for a trade deal post-Brexit, in contrast to what Obama said. He said, as an old ally, Britain will take priority. Hillary Clinton's been much more equivocal. So is a Trump presidency better for Britain as it exits the EU?
No, I don't think it is better for Britain. I think it would be a disaster not only for Britain, but for the rest of the world, because, frankly, he is not temperamentally suited to be commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He fights his battles by tweet. He gets angry when he doesn't like a tweet, and you can't have that sort of man running American foreign policy.
Right. In terms of personality, though, there's an anti-establishment mood in the United States, as some would argue in other parts of the world. Then isn't Hillary, a candidate who exemplifies the establishment, toast?
No, I don't think she is toast, because what people have seen, particularly when they contrast her with Donald Trump, is she has experience. You know, she was the First Lady. She's twice elected Senator for New York. She's been their Secretary of State. And although a lot has happened in the last 2 or 3 years, it shouldn't be forgotten that when she left her job as Secretary of State, she had approval ratings of about 63%, and people thought that she had done a good job. She had re-established trust in the world community, and she had restored faith in America after the Bush years.
But if people are looking for change, they would look to Donald Trump, wouldn't they? They would regard Hillary Clinton as the continuity candidate.
Yes, they would. But people don't want change if they're going to then drop over a cliff into the abyss.
And
they want...
Yeah, sorry, go on, Simon. No, carry on.
What they want is strong, responsible government with someone who is credible, who is trustworthy to be able to be commander-in-chief and have their finger on the nuclear button, and temperamentally fit to do that. And I think you'll find that in all opinion polls, when they're talking about temperament and responsibility, Hillary Clinton comes out top.
What about early voting? How's it gone in terms of Mrs. Clinton?
Well, apparently extremely well. I think it was yesterday or the day before, 57,000 people voted in Clark County in Nevada, which was a record. And a lot of those voters were Latinos who are core supporters of Hillary Clinton. I'm told that in Florida, the number of people early voting is significantly up. And again, looking at the analysis, because people register to vote either as a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, it looks like people are coming out in droves, and there is a significant proportion of people coming out who have not voted in the past.
All right.
And that's partly because the Clinton campaign has been working for over a year, having a field network on the ground to get people to register to vote and then get out and vote in a way that Donald Trump has not.
All right, Simon Burns, enjoy election night. And we can speak now to a supporter of Mr. Trump. It's the journalist and former aide to Nigel Farage, Raheem Kassam. He's also in Washington, obviously where everyone is gathering. Who do you think would be a better ally for Britain as we exit the EU, a President Trump or a President Clinton?
Well, I think it's very clear, Joe. Donald Trump has said that in a time when Britain will need to do its own trade deals bilaterally, especially with one of our strongest allies in the United States, Donald Trump has said, you're not going to the back of the queue, you're not going to the back of the line. And as Simon rightly identified there, Hillary is very much the continuity candidate, and that means continuing the policies of Barack Obama, not just domestically, but internationally. And that means that Britain would stand at the back of the line when we Brexit and if she becomes president. And I think you don't just have to look to that. You have to look to what General Richards, Lord Richards, said earlier this week, when he actually identified that a Trump presidency might actually make the world safer. You know, Hillary Clinton comes from this neoconservative political establishment where they are convinced that endless wars are the way forward for the West.
Right,
and Donald
all right.
Trump
Well,
does not think
so. Let's test your theory that it would actually make it a safer and better place. He says he'll carry out an extreme and vicious campaign against Islamic State. What does that mean in practice?
Well, I mean, he wants to wipe them out,
right.
not tinker around the edges.
He's not the only one to have said that. So what does it mean?
Well, it means not tinkering around the edges, as I say. You know, right now at the moment, we and the Americans are funding one side in Iraq and the other side in Syria. We're funding the Kurds and we're funding the Turks.
Right.
And they're
So
fighting
coming
each
on the
other,
side of Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad.
Well, I don't think it needs to be on the side of Vladimir Putin or Bashar al-Assad. But again, I will speak to what Lord Richards said this week, is that I think we're moving to a position where people are starting to realise, whether we like him or not, Assad doesn't seem to be going away. At some point, we're going to have to decide whether we hate him more or whether we hate the Islamic State more.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the things you said at the beginning, that actually it would be better for Britain. Simon Burns, as you said, actually, if there is a Trump presidency, then America will fall off the edge of a cliff. But why should we believe anything that Donald Trump actually says? Because, of course, we cannot challenge any of the things he's promised. When he says there'll be a wall with Mexico, do you believe he'd actually deliver that?
Well, actually, I think, the wall, I've seen lots of different estimates about how much it would cost and the time it would take.
Would he deliver it?
Yeah, I think he would deliver it. I'm not sure it would be on schedule or on budget like most government projects aren't, but I think he would strive to deliver it. But I think the most important part of his policy platform, one that often gets ignored, is the trade element, is actually getting a better deal for the US and US workers out of international trade deals. And I think that would be his most long-lasting legacy if he becomes president.
Yeah, but it's all about believing in what he says and whether it's actually just rhetoric. Will the USA withdraw from NATO?
No, I don't think the United States withdraw from NATO, but I think NATO is imbalanced at the moment. You have NATO countries all around the world, and Britain gets a bad deal out of NATO as well. We are the only ones now above that 2% spending limit, along with Poland and the United States, and the rest of the NATO countries are piggybacking on us. So I think it's about redressing the balance of NATO and making sure that everyone pays their fair share. If they don't, we need to reconsider it.
Will he ban Muslims travelling to the US?
No, I think that was an early on campaign throwaway line that then got turned into something. Well, actually, here's what you do in business and in politics: is you throw a broad idea out there and then you hear people out on what the comeback is. It's no use us playing this ideological, divided, partisan politics anymore when the country wants common sense solutions. And the way to get those common sense solutions out of people is to say, here's where I stand on it, tell me where you stand on it, and we'll end up somewhere in the middle.
Right, OK. Just let's have a sort of recap, if you like, of the early voting. We heard from Simon Burns. He believes it's going his way because of the large number of Latino voters. It's going to be impossible, isn't it, really, for Donald Trump to make up enough of the gap, although the polls are very tight nationally, in order to beat her?
Well, the Democrats are very good at early voting stuff. They're very good at these bulk ballots. That, in fact, there was a ruling out of Arizona yesterday that said they are no longer allowed to do that because it's basically tantamount to rigging the election and voter fraud. So they're very good at those things, and like the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, very good at the postal votes and so on and so forth. But it will come down to the day. I've seen the Nevada figures. I'm not entirely convinced that the mathematics are correct on those. But in terms of early voting, you are correct. She seems to have stolen somewhat somewhat of a march. But again, I think when it comes down to will be the day of the election and how many people will turn out for her. You know, if you look at this as an outsider, you see two very clear things. One side is the Hillary Clinton side, who are, by data and in anecdotal evidence, not very enthusiastic about their candidate. And on the other side, great enthusiasm for somebody who wants to, as he says, drain the swamp of Washington, D.C. And I'm here right now, I can tell you it needs draining.
I'm going to have to stop you there, but thank you very much.
I've been getting away